Hello and welcome to this edition of Side Retired, the MLB podcast. It is the three of us back again, Dylan, James, and Jack. And today we are breaking down the recent Hall of Fame announcement. There is indeed one new Hall of Famer in baseball. David Ortiz was elected to the Hall of Fame, so congrats to him. Of course, the arguably bigger news is that all of these steroid guys fell off the ballot. Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, Roger Clemens, and also Curt Schilling are not going to be Hall of Famers, at least via the BBWA. So let's get into that. James, Jack, how you guys feeling?
I think it's a bad decision by the writers to not put Bonds and Clemens in. And I think it just makes no sense because David Ortiz tested positive for steroids, was suspended for steroids, still got in, was a first ballot Hall of Famer. They didn't even make him wait a year. He got in. And then guys like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, guys who were only accused, never found to have taken or tested positive or were suspended, did not get in after 10 years. Nor did they ever really come all that close. I mean, 9% away. I mean, that's still a lot of votes Barry Bonds had to get there. So I just think it's a bad look for baseball on behalf of the writers because the Hall of Fame makes no sense anymore.
Yeah, I agree with James. I mean, I think Rob Manfred obviously gave the big speech. I think it was at Ortiz's retirement ceremony saying like the survey tested should not be treated with these other guys, which I don't really buy that logic. Like David Ortiz took steroids. He was convicted of taking steroids and he has much like David Ortiz is a great player. Like congratulations to him. But like compared to Barry, I know this is like a pretty flawed like argument to make, but compared to Barry Bonds, he has 200 less home runs. Barry Bonds actually stole bases. He played the field. He's a much worse baseball player than Barry Bonds. This is not to say David Ortiz, but this is Barry Bonds is the greatest baseball player to ever play, regardless of steroids. So to have one guy, even on the same ballot, not get in, and despite being convicted of the same thing as the other guy, who's a much better player, like James said, there's really no logic to it. It's a big glaring flaw for the Hall of Fame. I think something that every baseball fan should be disappointed that the museum dedicated to having, representing baseball history is without its best hitter and arguably best pitcher over a controversy that some other players have been allowed to go in for. So
I think before we do start to trash the Hall of Fame completely, we should also acknowledge David Ortiz deserves to be a Hall of Famer. Yes, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens as well probably should be, at least in our three opinions, but David Ortiz stats alone, yes, he's not Barry Bonds, but he is an amazing player. 500 career home runs, 3-time World Series champion, 141 OPS plus, World Series MVP, Silver Slugger, Home Run Derby champion, All-Star, broke the Bambino curse. There's a lot of David Ortiz is a very good baseball player. And yes, I know there are some people that are probably saying, oh, he's in a DH, which maybe I guess is why some people didn't vote for him. Harold Baines got in, Edgar Martinez got in. That basically broke the DH stereotype, right? Mariano Rivera got in as a reliever, sort of the best reliever, that sort of specialty. David Ortiz is probably the best designated hitter of all time. So before we continue on with the steroid debate and all that stuff, is there anything you guys want to say about David Ortiz's case alone and him making it?
I think the numbers speak for themselves. He had a Hall of Fame career, lifetime 141 OPS plus, 55 WAR as just a hitter. And yes, but especially as a DH, they make it harder for you to get WAR as a DH. He hit over 500 home runs. I don't disagree that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. He played 20 years and he was a fantastic player. But yeah, I just disagree that he gets in with a free pass and the other guys did not get in, period. So yeah, that's nothing against Ortiz. I just think that the other guys are better than him and should have already been in and should have gotten in this year.
Yeah, I hate to honestly just agree with James on everything he said, but I feel like it was a little too harsh on Ortiz right there. He is obviously an excellent baseball player, definitely should be in the Hall of Fame. I do think the WAR number is it's a valid argument. I don't think so. There are people who will claim that it's low enough, 57, where they say 60, 70 plus is your Hall of Fame type guy. And so that obviously not playing defense hurt him on that. But to say that he's not a Hall of Famer because of it, I think is a flawed argument to make. Counting stats are not they're not valued the way they used to be, but you hit over 500 home runs, you're a Hall of Famer.
The other guy that did fall off the ballot, not for steroid reasons, but probably also for off the field issues, that is Curt Schilling. He finished last year around 71, 72%, and everyone figured, oh, he's probably going to get in. Instead, after he didn't get in, he ended up saying, "Don't vote for me. I don't want to be a Hall of Famer." So writers took that and said, "All right, we won't vote for you." And he finished this year with only 58%, which is a lot lower than he did last year. Kurt Schilling, the player, anything you guys want to say?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great pitcher, almost 80 career WAR, 216 wins, 3,000 career strikeouts. I feel like the numbers speak for themselves. Great pitcher, pitched 20 years. I mean, yeah, I feel like when you look at pitchers, it's really just all about the numbers, all about this career, 200 wins, 3,000 strikeouts. And then like longevity, I guess, like, he pitched for a long time and he pitched well for a long time. So yeah, I think he's a Hall of Fame pitcher. And it's unfortunate to see that, he didn't want to be elected and he didn't want to be in the Hall of Fame this year. And the writers took that to heart and just didn't elect him.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers alone, he is not a borderline case. He's a surefire Hall of Famer. Obviously, he tormented me in 2004 when I was a toddler, and I have known about Kurt Schilling alone. He should be in the Hall of Fame. It's this character clause that people apply. I'm not going to comment on what he said. I think it's pretty horrible. Nothing more to say about it than that. But to say that there's not either other despicable people in the Hall of Fame already, to keep someone out when they have the numbers, they're a clear fire, one of the best baseball players of all time, is a bad look for the Hall of Fame. And I think the character clause is overvalued in the sense that there's people who are one, either borderline or not good in the Hall of Famers, but have the friends and have the character clause that gets them in. And guys like Kurt Schilling, who while off the field has some major issues, on the field is one of the best baseball players of all time.
And then we get to this interesting group of three guys that did actually reach the 50% plateau, which is normally an indication that if you get above 50, you're going to have a good shot at getting in, barring some strange exceptions like we saw with Bonds and Clemens. And that's Scott Rowland, he got 63%. That's Todd Helton, who got 52%, and Billy Wagner, who got 51%. Now, considering next year is going to be a very weak ballot, and we'll get into that in a second with all the new guys coming on there, do you think, I guess those are your three best bets at potentially having a Hall of Famer next year? Because it's going to be a very weak ballot in general.
Yeah, I think next year we're going to see, I feel like Rowland is definitely a lot more surefire than Helton and Wagner. I think Helton and Wagner will continue to climb as more and more guys start to fall off the ballot over these next couple of years. But yeah, I feel like Rowland is for sure a Hall of Famer. Along with Wagner. I'm very surprised Wagner doesn't get as much respect, especially with his career numbers and how impressive he was his entire career, and how he really is one of the top 5 relief pitchers of all time. So it's just surprising to see that he hasn't gotten more votes and more looks for the Hall. But I think with next year's ballot, he'll definitely have a shot to get over 65% and inch closer to that 75% mark.
Problem with Wagner is something that you saw with a lot of relievers before Mariano, is that you look at the WAR, only 27 is abysmal compared to some of the numbers these Hall of Famers put up. It just shows like it's not really nothing against him. It's just if you're only coming in, tops 2 innings, you'll move most of the time 1 per game. You're not even pitching every game. You're not going to accumulate much value statistically for your team. So it hurts your case for the Hall of Fame. Having Mariano get in, I think it was 3 years ago, I think that could help his case. And then I think if you watched our trivia episode, he has the lowest ERA of all time. So obviously someone who should be considered. I think Scott Rowland, as James said, is a very good case, especially when you consider like guys who we've had on here, especially Ken Davidoff and Mike Ficarra, who vote for 10 guys. You're going to see guys like Scott Rowland make their ballots, and when you have guys like Bonds, Clemens come off. So someone, and I think Scott Rowland has 3 or 5 years left. So someone you're definitely, if not next year, down the road, going to make it to Cooperstown.
Yeah, this is year 5 for Scott Rowland, so he still has 5 more attempts, and he's already passing that 60% threshold. So odds are he will make it there at some point. I'm going to run through a list of names of guys that fell off of this year's ballot, just to acknowledge, hey, they were there. We had Carl Crawford, Jake Peavy, AJ Pierzynski, Prince Fielder, Jonathan Papelbon, Justin Morneau, Mark Teixeira, Ryan Howard, Tim Lincecum, and then a guy that made it through last year but didn't make it through this year, Tim Hudson. And then finally, Joe Nathan fell short at 4.3%. Any of those names jump out, or is that just hats off, solid careers, not Hall of Famers?
I feel like it's just sad hearing Prince Fielder's name. He was so great in those years with the Brewers, and then sadly he went to Texas, and kind of all fell off and went downhill there. So yeah, that's kind of the one name that sticks with me from that list.
Yeah, you just hats off. You know, you lasted 10 years in the major leagues. You made the ballot. It's not something easy to do, obviously. Just good job to all those guys.
And guys that barely did make it, Torrey Hunter got 5.3, Mark Burley 5.8, and then Bobby Abreu 8.6, Jimmy Rollins 9.4. So yeah, we've actually made it the whole episode without mentioning Alex Rodriguez, who debuted on this year's ballot with 34%. Seems like a pretty low number, especially with Bonds and Clemens getting 66 and 65% respectively. Thoughts on A-Rod, and does today's non-Bonds announcement mean that A-Rod probably will never see his day in Cooperstown?
I think it's that argument about Bonds, and then you also have the fact that I disagree with this argument personally, but lots of the writers seem to think that because A-Rod tested twice in 13, I think that definitely kills any shot because he has the longest suspension, and also Ortiz only getting on because of the survey testing, and even with like those like him getting that shout out by Manfred saying like don't view this testing the same way. He's still like just squeezed in. He got 77.9% versus A-Rod didn't even get half of that. So just even in 10 years from now, when we see these younger writers who seem to be more generous to the steroid users, I think it's going to have to be Veterans Committee, which is probably even more of a long shot for a guy like A-Rod.
I agree. The only thing I'll say is that, dude, we really like people never really appreciated how great Alex Rodriguez was, but when you look at his career numbers, he is very much like top 5 players of all time. Like without this, like if you just ignore the fact the steroids, you know, the 162 game suspension. Think about it. He missed a season at the end of his towards the end of his career. He missed a whole year, 2014. He still hit 600 and 696, I believe, right? Is that his career home run total? Yeah. Like honestly, he's easily on pace for 725, 730 if he doesn't get suspended that one year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I just think it's crazy to me that a guy that has 3,000 hits, basically 700 home runs, 2,000 RBIs, stole like 350 bases. This guy could do it all. He was incredible. He was a great shortstop, great third baseman, absolutely raked. Won a World Series, won a couple MVPs. I just don't see how you could have one of the 5 greatest players in baseball not in the Hall of Fame. I feel like it's the same argument you can make for Barry Bonds. Like these guys were both generational talents. Everyone knows who Alex Rodriguez is. Sure, a lot of people hate him, but the dude could play baseball, like flat out. Like there's no lying.
I think Jared Diamond said it perfectly when he said, you're telling a bunch of kids who grew up in the 80s and 90s, your childhood is irrelevant and we're going to erase what baseball was to you guys, because regardless of if they cheated, it's a baseball Hall of Fame museum. It's for the players that you can't tell the story of baseball without. It's not pretty. Steroids are a part of baseball's history. You're telling all the kids that grew up in the 90s with the Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire home run chase, it means nothing. We're going to pretend like it didn't exist. We're going to hide it. We're not even going to put it in the Hall of Fame. We're not going to put it in the museum. Bonds, Clemens, the amount of kids that wore Barry Bonds jerseys is probably like rival to what's happening with Juan Soto now, and that everyone knows his name and he's the up and coming star. And imagine now if you're like a 16, 17-year-old kid who adores Juan Soto, if someone were to tell you, oh, by the way, we're going to try to erase his name from baseball in 25 years from now. It just seems kind of weird. And I think when Jared Diamond said, it feels like you're erasing my childhood, that kind of stuck with me of like, wow, that's actually a whole generation's baseball is being ignored by the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I agree. It would literally just be like, obviously Mike, not accusing Mike Trout of being on steroids, but if one day Mike Trout was accused of steroids, never tested positive, there was just speculation around it. And like, you just imagine Mike Trout wasn't in the Hall of Fame. Like people in 50, 60 years from now don't get to know who Mike Trout is and what impact he had on the game of baseball just because of some accusations. Like that's how it is with Barry Bonds. And that's, I get A-Rod did test positive, but I still just don't get, like, I want people in 50, 60, like people 50, 60 years should know who Alex Rodriguez was. Like he was a beast. Him, Ken Griffey Jr. playing together. That was a super team. That was like a dynamic duo that I remember. Obviously I wasn't alive, but I remember looking back when I was younger and like seeing clips of them playing together and going back and like A-Rod using Ken Griffey's bat hitting the home run. Like people should see all that stuff. Like that's very important to baseball's history. And I'm disappointed that the writers are going to let it just go away. Because I don't think A-Rod will ever get on into the Hall of Fame after this weekend.
Something Dylan mentioned, like obviously this is a pretty messy history, but like a museum should encapsulate your messy history, and baseball, like the steroid is far from the worst thing that's happened to baseball. Baseball was segregated, for the first almost a century of its existence, and we're talking about guys taking drugs to play better. Like it's the worst thing imaginable. So in my mind, like you guys said, like people don't realize how generational A-Rod is, and like James alluded to, like there's a very strong argument to be made, obviously ignoring steroids, which is a big if, but A-Rod and Barry Bonds have the argument to be the two greatest hitters of all time, and we're both are just refused to be entered into the National Baseball Museum.
All right, the final two questions I have for you guys, they're sort of related. I'll run through the list of first year eligible candidates. And if you're watching on the YouTube, we've lost James for a second. So Jack, maybe this is just on you to answer these. I'll give you the list of first year eligible players in 2023. Wow, it's weird to think. And just say yes or no, Hall of Famer, or even, I don't even know if any of these guys are worth 5% of the ballot in a couple of years. And they might just be one and done fall off guys. So run down quickly, just give me a yes or no. Ubaldo Jimenez.
No.
Carlos Ruiz.
The only guy making it next year is Beltran. I think Beltran's the only one who has a legitimate shot.
There's some interesting, there's John Lackey, who's a compiler. There's Jared Weaver, who's a compiler. R.A. Dickey won a Cy Young, and Francisco Rodriguez had over 400 career saves. But yeah, I think these guys fall into the same category that you have with Joe Nathan, Mark Teixeira, Ryan Howard, where they're great careers. But I mean, I don't think anyone's saying dying on a hill that Mike Napoli belongs in the Hall of Fame. But you did mention Jacoby Ellsbury is also eligible, but I think you just mentioned the key name to this whole ballot next year is what are the writers going to do with Carlos Beltran, who is a guy that on statistics alone is a Hall of Famer. And then there's the 2017 Astros cheating scandal, which happened in his final season. So it's not like you can say, oh, the cheating scandal helped him throughout his whole career, like you can say with the steroid guys, but it does taint his reputation a little bit. I would still vote Carlos Beltran a Hall of Famer. The numbers say it for themselves. He didn't have the counting stats, but when you're a 9-time consecutive All-Star, 3-time Gold Glove, Silver Slugger, Rookie of the Year, I'm pretty sure that spells Hall of Famer, but maybe not.
Yeah, I agree. And then I think an important point and something I think you all would concur with me on is, yes, we're saying that steroid guys should be admitted to the Hall of Fame, but I want on Carlos Beltran's plaque that not only was he part of the Astros, but he was one of the guys who orchestrated the cheating scandal. And that should be something that's mentioned. It should be something that's on his plaque and something that he's remembered for.
I don't know about that.
Yes.
I agree, because his World Series championship shouldn't count. I mean, it's as simple as that.
I am totally like, he's not me. That's not on par with the
steroids. You can give him all the accolades he has. Just don't put him as a World Series champion
for their merits on but despite taking these steroids, it should be part of their legacy that they did that, because while I think Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer, I'm not going to deny that the prominence of baseball, like the baseball records with steroid holders, is definitely a problem and something that it taints baseball's reputation. I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but it's not perfect, and it should be something that they're remembered for just as much as hitting 762 home runs or Carlos Beltran being over a 70-WAR player. It's part of how they changed the game.
Yeah, I think you can keep all his accolades. Just don't let him say that he's a World Series champion on the plaque. I think it's as simple as that.
All right, and then
same goes for when Altuve and Correa get put on the ballot. I mean, I just think it's that simple.
Correa will have a couple championships, but not with
Houston. Exactly. Yeah.
Can't wait for that. It's not going to happen. Whatever. All right. Final question for you guys. And you can see if you're watching on the YouTube, the screen has all the results from this year's ballot. Give us who's going to make it next year, if anyone, and is there anything else that's going to stand out on next year's ballot? We'll go to James first, Jack, and then I'll finish this off.
I'll say next year we get Roland and Beltran will probably be the two that make it.
Yeah, I'll say Roland, Beltran, and I'm going to say A-Rod actually goes up and clears 40% on the ballot.
All right,
I agree. A-Rod will go up. I'd even say he clears 50 next year just because of how weak the ballot is. I mean, unless a bunch of people are putting in blank ballots, because there's so many guys that vote for 10.
The weak
know what I mean?
ballot's not affecting him though, because there's no one there saying like A-Rod's not a Hall of Famer. It's that A-Rod took yuck juice and doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, but
I
the
think there's
problem
some
is-
guys
The
that voted
problem
for
is that
Bonds
the guys that vote for 10, like this year, you could make an argument for other guys. Like you could say Vizquel, you could say Pettit, you know what I mean? Like you had to put Bonds, Clemens, Schilling,
Sosa, Schilling,
on
yeah.
there. Exactly. So they put all those guys on there. Dude, you're not going to be able to put like a Baldo Jimenez over A-Rod next year or do some absurd stuff like that. And like no one notice. So,
I think all those guys publicize their ballots as well.
I mean, yeah, but I feel like A-Rod could get over 50% next year with Bonds and because I mean he'll fill in some of the percentages that Bonds and Clemens got for sure. And then I think other people will kind of be more after seeing Ortiz get in, you know, from that same
Yeah.
era for steroids. I think people will kind of be like, oh, well, if he got in, then like I should probably vote for A-Rod too, because these other people voted for Ortiz. So
I agree with your logic on that. I just think that these writers are stubborn and they're going to push their narrative that A-Rod's not a Hall of Famer and say he was convicted not once, not twice. Ortiz had like the weird testing. That's enough for me to not keep him on the ballot.
yeah.
And then I guess I will say I'll agree with you. I think Beltran and Roland are probably the two guys. I will say a third guy gets in. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to say it's one of the guys we don't expect. Maybe this would be a long shot, but Jeff Kent will be in his final year next year. He only got 30% this year, but who knows, on a weak ballot, you can see what happens with a guy like Tim Raines, who wasn't polling really well in his initial attempts and then all of a sudden shot up to 75%. Who knows if that happens with him? Also keep an eye out for Andrew Jones. He's been slowly creeping up in his first 5 attempts on a weaker ballot. Guys like that could definitely get the attention that they currently don't get, especially with literally, if you look at it, the first 4 out of the first 5 guys are now gone in Ortiz, Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling. So I believe, unless there's anything else you guys have to add, we will be picking our Coco Crisp of the year in a couple of episodes. Coco didn't even make the ballot, so that was our mistake on that one.
I think we need to
but
go for someone that can actually get on the ballot. I think that'll be our
Yeah.
best.
I think
a better-
based on
better
today's
option.
conversation, Ubaldo Jimenez might be the guy, but
He doesn't have a chance.
we'll figure it out. But unless there's anything else, we will be back tomorrow. The Side Retired trivia episode will be released. You don't want to miss that because some fun things happened there. We will also be releasing our top 10 shortstop episode and resuming those top 10 lists shortly. We just had a couple of interviews lined up, so those kind of got put on the back burner. But also thank you to Ken Davidoff, Mike Vaccaro, and Jared Diamond, who came on and talked about the Hall of Fame with us over the past 2 weeks or so. You can go check out those episodes right below this one. I don't know, there is now a Side Retired Instagram page. James gave up his quest to start it. We now have a couple other guys running that. The Twitter, Side Retired Pod, the Instagram, Side Retired Pod. A lot of writers working hard on the website, writing articles weekly there. So make sure to check that out, the YouTube, and of course the Apple podcast that you're listening to us on right now. I think I've plugged everything. I think we've done everything. I don't think there's anything else to add. So for this podcast episode and for Barry Bonds' attempts on the Hall of Fame ballot, the side is indeed retired.